Andre Cilliers, TreasuryOne's currency expert. Andre, the rand relatively unchanged from when we spoke about a fortnight ago. Some rand strength before we paired those gains into last week. What's driving the rand dollar price action at the moment?
This is going to sound very, very boring. Inflation is driving everything. It's driving the world at the moment. And when we last spoke, I think when we spoke about technical levels, we said if it breaks down below the 1520 level, we could see it lower. And if it breaks out above the 1550 level, it could go higher. And here we are, around the 1553, 1560 really being the top side. But it's in that spread and we're going nowhere. And if you look at it, it's been in that range now for quite some time without any new stimulus coming out other than inflation.
We know that the Federal Reserve is going to hike rates this year, possibly multiple times. How many rate hikes are you expecting from the Fed this year? And as a result of your forecast, do you expect a strong or weak dollar going forward into the rest of
Well, if
2022?
you look at the inflation figures that came out and you look at the last Federal Reserve meeting where they had very clearly indicated that they will actually most probably start in March already with their interest rate hikes. Since then, the dollar has actually retreated slightly. And you would recall that I've also said, the people want to see what happens now. They want to see this actual movement. And at the moment, they've got the Federal Reserve, I always going to say, a bit by the back end, because can the Federal Reserve satisfy the markets? The only way, and I've spoken about this, is if they come out with an increase that's more than what is expected by the market. Now, we've seen that they've moved in 25 basis points increments. If we look at what's discounted in terms of yields, in terms of rates at the moment, then already a 35 to 40 basis point increase is penciled in and discounted for in the market for March. Now, as we get closer to March, that's going to increase. So if the Federal Reserve only increases by 25 basis points, it will actually be a disappointment to the market. And I will definitely not think that the dollar will react positively on that. It will actually react negatively. And the closer, as I say, we get to March, that's going to be discounted more and get closer to 50. And even then, if they do the 50 basis point move, the market will start putting them on the back end again and say, are we going to see another 50 basis point? So, no, I do not think that the dollar is in for a heck of a strengthening period because of their rate. That's the first one. The second one, why I say that, is if you look at the Bank of England, they've raised rates last week. Inflation in the Eurozone came out at record highs, even though there was a disappointment in terms of retail sales over the December period. If you look at South Africa, we've already raised rates again. So the emerging market space as such, and some of the first world countries around the globe, is actually starting to really look at interest rate increases as well, which puts the Federal Reserve behind the curve. And as long as they're behind the curve, that's the second reason why I say the dollar will not really strengthen.
Are there any new developments in Turkey? We know the lira's importance as an emerging market currency proxy. The noise around the lira seems to have calmed somewhat this year, but what exactly is happening down over there?
Yes. You're not going to reveal your secrets as to what you did over the weekend, and Mr. Erdogan is not going to reveal his secrets as to what can be expected of him in the near future. And he's all that we do know about Mr. Erdogan is that his behavior will be erratic. It will be unpredictable. So it's very difficult to say what we can expect out of Turkey. I think Mr. Erdogan has learned over the last couple of years that, he gets slammed and hammered with extremely volatile moves, which doesn't make his management of his currency or the management of his economy any easier. So hopefully from that lesson, he will become a little bit less erratic, but not he will not lose it at all. but it will become a little bit less erratic, and that might be slightly positive for the emerging market space in the sense that we could see less erratic movement because of Turkey going forward.
Is the geopolitical risk between Russia and Ukraine impacting the currency markets at
Yes,
all?
it's difficult to determine whether Russia will win out of this because trying to take on the NATO countries by invading the Ukraine. Now, I don't think we'll have a full-scale war, but they will certainly, in terms of economic sanctions from the first world countries towards Russia, will definitely impact negatively on their economy, number one. Number two, the cost of an invasion of the Ukraine will drain on their reserves because that's costly. So sanctions plus the cost, they cannot emerge as the winner here. So I doubt whether it was now mentioned this morning that the diplomatic lines are still open for talk. So I don't think they will immediately invade, but we'll have some skirmishes and we'll see that, and that will have an impact on what happens going forward. It will have an impact on oil prices. It will have an impact of what happens in the Middle East area. So it's a volatile situation, but I don't think Russia will emerge as a winner. Now, if they don't emerge as a winner, they're part of the emerging market space. That could be a little bit negative for the emerging market.
The budget speech is taking place in around 2 weeks' time. How are you expecting what comes out of that day to affect the
You're
rand?
missing the SONA speech coming up this week from the city, from the town council here in Cape Town, seeing that we don't have a parliament with proper parliament buildings anymore. So Mr. Ramaphosa is going to have the first opportunity of spelling out what can be expected from them. I think he can put the slight positive spin onto what can be expected out of the ANC, what kind of legislation can be expected, what can happen in terms of welfare, pensions, and grants and so forth. That will even have an impact on what the minister will tell us. But when the minister comes up and we look at tax income and so forth, then I think some of the statistics that he's going to give us in terms of revenue collection and so forth is going to be positive. And I think the deficit that we run will be a little bit smaller as percentage of GDP. I think there might be a further windfall income from the tax revenue base. That would be positive for him. But I expect him to remain firmly on track with the staying on the fiscal discipline path and not going for an overspending and most probably giving us slightly more positive figures that was even given to us during the medium-term budget speech. So that could be positive for the rand going into the budget speech and after the SONA.
Commodities continue to rally and remain strong. Until this changes, can we expect a strong rand or a stronger rand for the foreseeable future?
I think the pressure on the rand to weaken substantially will be slightly on a handbrake situation with commodities at these slightly elevated levels. Now, that for a very long time, I've not been a commodity bear. I remain not to be a commodity bear. I remain on the path of demand that will still be there going forward with economies coming back into growth. If inflation continues up the path that it is and interest rates increases substantially, then we might see commodities sort of leveling out a little bit and not going any further. And that would be because of demand becoming a little bit slower because of higher interest rates throughout economies. But I'm still at the forefront of no massive decline in commodity prices aiding the rand as a commodity currency going forward for the rest of the year.
Lastly, and I know we mentioned technicals right at the beginning, of the program. But just tell us about what the technicals are saying now in terms of short-term price action. I'm talking specifically rand dollar, and what are the important levels there, Andre?
1560. It's got to break 1560 if it wants to move higher. 1520 on the bottom end. It's got to break 1520 if it wants to go to a stronger side of a 1480 or a 1490. If we do not break either 1520 or the 1560 level significantly. Now, when you speak about breaking that, no point in it going to 62 in the middle of the day and closing at 58. No point in breaking 20 and going to 1518 and closing above 1520 at the end of the day. You have to see closes below the 1520 and a close below 1560 to actually see a significant break. Those remain the firm technical levels. There's smaller levels in between, but I do not regard that as important. 1520, 1560, that's it. Stay within those ranges, and that's where we will be.